Hello, everybody. This is producer Chris, and I just wanted to take a moment before we get to this week's episode to remind you to hit that follow button if you have not already, and rate and review our podcast on whatever platform you're listening to us on. Also, we have a YouTube channel called TabletopTV. Go like and subscribe over there. Also, follow us on X at TTTalkPod, where you can go over there, voice your opinions, give us topics you'd like us to cover, whatever it might be, you can reach us there. And finally, we have a TikTok account at TabletopTV LLC, where we'll be posting more videos over there as well. So make sure you're following, make sure you are subscribed. That way you are notified whenever we upload anything. All right, enough of me. Now let's get to the table.
Welcome to Tabletop Talk. We're your hosts, Kyle.
And Jeremy.
And Rick.
And again, we have Anthony with us today.
Woohoo!
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, I can't believe we lucked out and got you twice in a row. Trevin wasn't able to make it with us. Appointments him and his wife have for all the good bundles of joys that we heard about beforehand. So
I couldn't remember if we said it on the podcast or not, so I wasn't going to mention anything, but if we have, There's a lot. I know some of us in the room are parents, so we know what that process looks like.
Anthony's just looking wide-eyed. He doesn't know.
Well, maybe if you'd listened to the podcast sooner. No, I'm kidding.
I listened to every episode.
It hasn't released yet.
I was going to say, yeah. It released, I think this last one. Today, yeah.
Oh, I didn't listen to today's episode.
I realize we can't
I came here from work.
Surprise!
I realize we can't say that, though, right now. Because we're in the middle of our podcast, and we just openly said that we released it today.
So today is a different... Now?
So many weeks from when this will come out.
Wait, now? But when? When's now?
Wait,
now?
These aren't live?
One of my favorite podcasts records theirs like 2 months in advance. And it's really funny hearing them try and figure out the dates of when it's going to launch, and they just argue with each other over it.
We could do a year in advance someday. That'd be real great. Because we'd be releasing them, and potentially some of us, there'd be new people, or some of us would...
Not to mention how chaotic the world is and how fast things happen now. We would be, like, cheering about something, and, like, by the time it comes out, that wouldn't even exist anymore.
But this content is timeless.
That is true.
Yeah, we actually haven't talked about anything specifically right now, except for the fact that now was then, and then...
Could be now?
Could be... Well, no, I think then is further than.
Wait.
Who knows? This episode might come out after Trevin and his wife have their baby.
All right. What is this,
Wait, they're having a baby?
Yes, that was the whole thing of us.
Yeah.
Oh, he said little bundles of joy. I didn't know what he was talking about.
I was about...
That's what I call Hot Pockets.
I was about to...
Congratulations on your Hot Pocket.
I was about to let you know, and then it led into this whole debunkle of how much we should actually, like, drop the fourth wall and how much we don't.
That does bring us to our first ad break. Hot Pockets.
You no hungry for Dungeons and Dragons. You hungry for Hot Pockets.
Not an official sponsor.
Yes.
Hot Pockets, please sponsor
We're
us.
currently paying them to say their name on our podcast.
Hey, they did. Hot Pockets did a Magic the Gathering collaboration last year, and I bought like 4 boxes of Hot Pockets 2 weeks after the expiration of the promo codes.
I remember.
And I just got
that's why I didn't do it.
Bunch of Hot Pockets.
That's why I didn't do it. And then you were like telling me about it. You're like, guys, there's this. And before I could tell you, you sent a follow-up text like, never mind, I just got home and realized it's expired. I was like, oh, poor Rick. I could have warned you if I just checked my phone an hour earlier.
Every single one of those Hot Pockets. That was not the issue, but I just got stuck with boxes where I was like, oh, cool, I'll get this deck and this deck and that and this. Absolutely not.
So today's podcast is about snacks at the table, right?
Actually, today's podcast is about one-shots and writing them. Since we have 3 DMs here today, we are going to actually talk about one-shots.
which is perfect because I am the one who hasn't DM'd. So I'm going to be asking our questions today.
Oh, thank you.
That's right.
Now, that
Second
being said,
week in a
I
row
did
for
about
Rick.
70% of a one-shot write-up myself based on a homebrew kit for Hyrule for Legend of Zelda.
Nice.
And then the party I played with completely fell apart, and we haven't played ever since. But, so I do have a very, very limited experience in this.
Jeremy and I
have
have talked about running a Zelda one-shot before.
Shout out to D&D Wiki. Their Hyrule homebrew rated like a 4.5 stars. It is outstanding.
And shout out to Critical Role for the Hyrule one shot that they did.
Shout out to Matt
they need-
Mercer.
like they
I was going to
with-
say, is that
with
not
his
really
Ganon,
fair?
I mean-
Because Matt Mercer now
Was Ganon.
is Ganondorf.
Yeah.
So it's like, is it really? It's not fair when you have the guy building a homebrew.
Well, wait, hold on. Is he Ganondorf, though, or is he just Ganon? I thought he was just Ganon.
Spoiler alerts for Tears of the Kingdom, a game that came out over a year ago. It is actually Ganondorf.
Okay.
Sexy Ganondorf is what I remember.
Yeah.
No shirt, Ganondorf. Well, I mean, I don't think he's worn a shirt really ever.
He wore armor in the first few things. He
Many
normally
times he's worn a shirt.
This is the only time he's not actually worn a shirt.
You know, the important questions that we can ask. I will say, before I jump into the questions, all of my favorite podcasts completely waste their time for like the first half an hour by just talking about absolutely nothing
It's a
before
good thing
jumping
it's
in.
only a 30-minute show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody's Google searches is going to be shirtless Ganondorf.
Probably don't.
They won't have to pull it up. It's already on their search feed.
Yep.
I was gonna say it's Chris's background.
But so to get into the actual topic of write-ups of one-shots, when you're writing a one-shot, what is the... there go my questions. Here they are again. What is the first thing that you focus on and work on when you are building your one-shot?
Yeah, Anthony, you're the guest, and I don't want Jeremy to keep stealing the first answer every time. If you wanna,
Yeah, so I'd love to get in before Jeremy. It's one of my favorite things in life. I would say, like, take all your ideas and cut it in half and throw half them away, and then cut it in half again and throw half them away. Because a one-shot is not a lot of time, and you got a lot of ground to cover in a short amount of time. So I always approach it. I haven't actually really done that many one shots, but I approach it the same way I approach general sessions, is trying to do like a 3-act setup, where I have a beginning setup, kind of what do I think, and then how do I think it's going to end. But I never get too specific on how I think it's going to end, because I always want to leave some room for the players.
A real Battle of Hornburg situation where you make the whole thing in itself a 3-act narrative.
yeah.
That's a Lord of the Rings reference for those uneducated.
I thought you were going to say
Middle-earth.
uncivilized.
No, I
And uncivilized.
I'm going to say for me, for one shots, that's most of my experience as a DM is doing one shots, and they've all been homebrew ones. And not to say that you can't homebrew, like that you can't do a non-homebrew, one shot. There are plenty out there. I just found it. I find it fun because it's kind of unlimited creativity. And so for me, when I first want to create a one shot, I think about the people I'm playing with and going to DM for, and I try to figure out what kind of theme they like. So for my nephew, who I did a one shot for, his is goofy adventure. So I figured out, hey, what would goofy adventure look like for him? And this was one where I co-DM'd with Anthony, where it's like, it starts in a high school and their brother and sister are kidnapped, and it turns out there's a portal to a medieval castle, right? You're like, it's goofy, and there was an NPC along the way that was a janitor, a custodian, who came along and was absolutely great the whole time. So it's just like, hey, what's one goofy idea for them? For the one shot I did for the most recent one for, Kyle, Trevin, Rick, among others. Kyle, Trevin, and Rick, all three of them I know are really deep into lore, learning, political intrigue, all of that. So I was like, okay, let's do a one shot where there is a lot of a lot of lore built in. I want there to be something. And so I just picked one idea. I'm like, this has got to be something that is like a political uprising, or there's an underbelly. And I went with that. And then from that, I just built a one shot around it. It was like, oh, I need an intro, similar to the 3-act. I'm like, I've got this idea. I need an intro. I need at least one battle, and I need a kind of an end where they're going to go.
I agree. The 3-act thing is actually probably the best advice anyone could give. I tend to start with a theme, so I pick up what kind of vibe do I want to give. So like right now, I'm working on a one shot that I decided to go with more of a Western and steampunk kind of vibe to it. So that's my first thing: is what's the layout of my like realm? What is it that I'm going to do in this one shot, or the vibe I want people to understand is going on? Then I just start hammering away on like listing stuff. I'm not as good about cutting down my things.
It's hard.
It's very hard. So I usually leave multiple options. Jeremy has brought this up and without knowing revealed my secret on prior shows. He had mentioned the idea of recycling your stuff or having a few other things planned out and just reusing them. That's pretty much my whole thing. I set up like 5 different paths that it's like, no, they are all written out enough that whatever you guys choose to do, you can do. But my main first step is always pick a theme, come up with it, and then I start to come up with, what do I want for the baddie? Do I even want a baddie? Is it a situation? Is it this? Followed then by who is going to play after I've fleshed out a little bit more of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and following up on my own, when I first think about it, I create a Google Doc. And because it's going to be a brainstorm, I treat it like I'm writing a short story. And so I create a Google Doc where I go, here's the theme, and then I just type stuff out. And then after I do that, then I can do Anthony's thing of like, hey, go ahead and remove some. And I let it just kind of just let it brew for a while and just see what populates.
Yeah.
And the reason I say like cut out a bunch of the ideas you have isn't because it's like a downer or anything. It's like, you're going to set yourself up for failure if, like, let's say you're a brand new DM, you got all these ideas, and then all of a sudden you look at the clock and you realize that 2 of your 3 hours are already up and you've got 10% done. You then have this panic moment where you're trying to shoehorn things in there and it just doesn't fit naturally. And so you can get by with a lot less. Now, if you're a DM who's just doing a one shot because it's, I always do like weird holiday themed one shots to give a break, then yeah, I can recycle stuff, and so I'm fine with like, oh, we didn't get to that, I'll use it somewhere else. But as a new DM, I would definitely cut,
yeah,
kill you.
Like Kyle said, or Jeremy, that I tend to be very into like the lore and research of stuff. So I would say know like the theme that Kyle talked about. Know your theme or know your topic, so that, to Anthony's point, if you have to cut stuff out, you still know everything. Like,
yeah.
For me, when I, like the one that I said I tried building, it was a topic I knew a ton about. It's Legend of Zelda. It's like, all right, this is what's going to happen. The Triforce is going to play into it a certain way, but each piece is going to be guarded by this big boss, this big boss, this big boss. And so I could start going at it from a sense of like, I know pretty much everything I'm ever going to need to know about this franchise. So there's my starting base, and then I could craft it from there. So I would, be it a homebrew, pick a topic that you really, really enjoy or you know a bunch about, or use something where you have a source book immediately at your aid to where you can always have that as a reference.
For sure.
Yeah, that actually brings up something, too, that one way that I used one-shots inside of my campaign was if we didn't have all the players that were necessary, I would just, on the fly, create a one-shot in a different location in the world. And so the players would be familiar with the map and the world, and then they would begin to learn about the world, even though it didn't pertain directly to their characters. And so it's still tied back in with the main story. And I thought that was a good way of like theming it and still having it be useful to what I was doing before.
For sure.
Mm-hmm. That's fun. There was a DM I was talking to who, when someone couldn't show up, instead of doing a one shot that was within their world, they treated it as they were all magically teleported to a different dimension where they were in a battle world, and it's a competition. So it was basically like Dragon Ball Super, where it's like, hey, you're now in the Tournament of Champions. And they had these crazy gladiator battles.
Big old tournament of power.
And then they would be transported back. And so, like, even if you have some, like, as a DM, you have some fun idea that you're like, it just doesn't fit in my world, you can make it fit in your world with a one shot.
Yeah, Critical Role did that, actually, where they had Vox Machina versus what's their
The Mighty Nine?
The Mighty Nine, yeah. They like split the group in half, and then I believe oh man, I'm blanking on who it was. Percy, his actor, he was a back and forth character. So like they would have to collect like this one item, and whichever team had it would get him on their team. So he'd either flip from Percy or his Furbolg and all. I didn't listen to the Mighty Nine, so I don't know a lot on there. But yeah, that was actually really cool. They did like a one-shot battle where they just basically were pulled down into Avernus, into a giant ring, and all these imps and devils were just watching and cheering. And I did run that one time with our buddy Sean and David. We had a D&D game, like you said, where nobody could show up. This was our Minds of Phandelver game. We did one where then we just decided to see what would happen if all three of our characters did like a 1v1v1. It didn't go well for Cavill, that's for sure. Cavill was not prepared for it.
Yeah.
Excellent. So on the opposite end of that spectrum of question of what's the first thing that you do, what is the last element of a one-shot that you typically create or put together?
For me, for the ones that I've done, I have 3 possible endings. And yeah, you will try to kind of guide them to, the path that they're on, because it's a one-shot is 3 to 5 hours. It's not that much time. There's not that many things that could happen, but players will eventually make stuff happen that you didn't expect. And so I try to have 2 possible endings where it's stuff that I expect them to do, and it will, the story will be complete. And then there's a third one, depending on how the play goes. And the third one is an ending with an extension. So if I'm running in a one-shot and it goes really well, because I'm such a new DM, I don't want to like sign myself up for DMing, especially with new people that I haven't DM'd for that much. I leave a third ending, which is the finale with an invitation to a second one-shot or a campaign. And so that's what happened on the last one. We went and we played, and it was going really well, and everyone was vibing good, and it got to the end, and it was like, okay, we're going to do the ending that is a continuation of the story, and now I've signed myself up to DM a campaign. It's something that I wanted to do, but I was nervous about DMing because it's so much work, and I don't want to do all that work if it was not fun. And so I leave that third option for myself to go, okay, it's going to continue forward, versus the other 2 are like, hey, that was fun, story's cut, and I'm going to go relax.
Yeah. I thought you did really good with your one shot we played the other day, and I wish we had a chance to record it, but it was probably a good thing we didn't. We all were pretty loud and ruckus.
Yeah.
There was a lot of drinks involved.
It was great.
It was a great time. What about you, Anthony? What's the last thing you end up working on in a one shot?
The last thing, I mean, I'm always trying to put in more details than I should. And so I think really, like, if I was to really think about advice of what I would do is communicate with your players, like, the intent of the one shot.
So that's your advice, but what do you end up doing?
Oh, I'm working on lights and sound and things like that.
That's right. You're Mr. Ambiance. I forgot about that.
Yeah. If you haven't listened to the last episode of this podcast. That's what I spend my most time working on. Like,
gotcha.
I can wing all the other stuff, and then I spend hours getting the ambiance right.
So,
but like where I think I've gone wrong as far as not communicating with people about a one shot. Like, I think one shots most of the time have a role of like they're a one-off thing, and there is more of a linear kind of progression of things.
Yeah.
There isn't as much of an open-ended thing. So I'm not preparing an open-ended do whatever you want campaign.
It's
where
more
I'm
of a
feeding off
railroad,
you.
not
Don't
like
say
a
that
forced.
word. That's a bad word.
I know, it's a bad word.
That's a bad
The
word.
Continental Express.
Yes.
The tracks one
So,
follows.
The idea of that, like, you have freedom in this, but also know that this isn't like we're going to travel to this other city now. And you're like, I don't have another city. What are you talking about? I only have this one city planned.
It looks exactly like the city you were just in.
So,
in fact,
like,
it's named the same too.
I think, like, if we were to pick a board game off the shelf and play it, nobody would complain the fact that, like, it's got a certain flow to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You still can choose what you do in the game, and it has different outcomes, but it's still the game that you're playing. And so I think communicating that ahead of time, so
For
that
sure.
everyone's on the same page.
No, and I think in general, in any game, it's very important communication is between the DM and the players, because you end up in a lot of situations where the players want to push something that the DM's like, that's not what we were planning. Or you have like 3 people thinking that you have a different game going on than what was intended. Me and Anthony, we were talking about this beforehand, actually. That you sometimes end up where if you don't talk with people ahead of time for either a one-shot or a campaign, sometimes there's a few guys like us that really like the lore and such, and that focus on making a good narrative. But we've all played with a lot of people who, and I think this is the majority of people, use it as an escape and like to be the big hero and like the look at me, I'm OP, I'm walking over everything. And then you have like the murder hobos and such.
Yeah.
But
And I will say too, like, it's not a conversation where you're talking to the player saying, do exactly what I tell you to do. You're not trying to force them into anything.
No, and so I feel like even though railroad is like a curse
You
word
keep saying
in
that
there,
word.
It's a cursed word.
well, they can't see us in person, so I gotta use the words. And the point being,
Shudders.
Oh my gosh. The point being is that it's not always a bad thing as long as you're not forcing the people to. Like, I understand it's used in that connotation, but to a degree, a DM needs to almost slightly railroad, especially in a one-shot, because you're just trying to get from point A to point B. Like you said, it's not a huge thing like, oh, well, you can go and explore whatever you want. It's like, well, you can, but we got a few hours to cover one story.
I like to think of it, now that you've mentioned that cursed word many times,
I just wanted to see how many times you guys would shudder.
a lot. Every time.
Every time.
Every time. And the people at home are shuddering as well. We know it.
I know.
We've actually lost half the viewers.
I think of it as a like t-ball game versus a baseball game. Baseball has a ton of rules that you have to follow, and you get these children who are 4 years old or 5 years old going up and trying to be like, hey, we're going to have you play t-ball, this thing with lots of rules. And so it's just, yes, there is going to be this path that they have to go on. But can that little kid do circles in the outfield? Sure. Right.
Yeah.
As they get older and as you start to get the stuff and you understand more, you're like, you're going to be benched for doing that stuff. And at the start, it's like, yeah, you can do that. And so for the story of a one shot, it's like, guys, we have this t-ball set and we're going to go in the path. Sometimes you might goof off, but the path is still moving forward.
Yeah.
As the other resident sports like nut on the podcast, in addition to producer Chris, who also has children around the same age as my son, when your kid runs to third base after hitting the ball, it still counts.
Yeah.
Came to mind.
Yeah, it still counts, and you just move them over because that's what it is in that vibe. In a one shot, would this work? Normally, no, but we're gonna let it work here.
Yeah. You both are about to like probably glare at me when I tell you what my last thing I work on in a one shot is.
How you're going to railroad the players.
I was gonna say, don't say the word.
It actually is the story of the game itself. Is the very last thing I do.
That's so interesting.
So I get.
I'm shocked.
Okay, that's why I didn't tell you guys ahead of time what my answer was on this. So I get so focused on the lore and the building. Like Rick mentioned in the last podcast, I believe he mentioned this on air. Maybe it was off the air, but he was talking about how his internal theater of the mind is really good. He could picture almost anything. That's exactly what's going on with me all the time. I am an overload of it. I literally cannot function in the real world because I'm so like lost traveling Middle Earth in my mind and such. And
as we all should be.
As we all should be.
That is the real world.
Yeah.
Like,
thank you.
Thank
you. It sounds so much better when someone else says that.
We're doing a podcast because I'm completely incompetent and crippled. So between the two, I just can't do anything aside from fantasy stuff and talking about fantasy stuff. But no, for me, it ends up being the actual plot of the one shot is the last thing I work on. And it's because I get so into the lore and the character building. Like, I get really into my characters. I know what they look like. I know how they talk, what they're going to do. I know what things players will say that will make them mad and not like them. I know what things players will say that will make them like them. It's hard for me to come up sometimes with the actual path and the travel and like what the journey is until I have a better idea of, okay, well, what's the premise of this place? My theme is we go with a Western theme. Okay, so I go along, I make up a few cities, I make up places that you never would touch. I am not someone to recommend following their guide on how to do this.
That's interesting. So you build the world first, and then you go, what can happen in this world?
Yeah.
That's how I would.
That works.
That's how I'd approach a campaign for sure.
The last one shot I wrote that Jeremy played in, I literally wrote that the night before. I came up with everything else like weeks in advance. The night before I wrote the actual campaign. I have in my head who I know I want them to encounter, what things I want them to encounter, but I don't have it written down. And so I start to go with what are the ideas I like and didn't like, and how can I incorporate those onto a path that is linear and makes sense for point A to point B of here's where we start, we have to somehow end here.
Yeah, I like that. Now, complete side note right here. You guys are going to laugh at this. So the question was, what is usually the last part of a one-shot for you, right? And I took that literally as the finale of my one-shot, not the last work I was doing.
You know, I didn't want to correct you earlier, but I was wondering about that.
So I was like, yeah, I talk about my endings, and then it goes to you guys. You're like, yeah, what's the last work I do on it? And I go, I answered that incorrectly, but I'm going to keep my answer because that is what you do in Dungeons and Dragons. Your DMs just roll with whatever. They're like, that wasn't what I thought, but it still works. It is an answer.
Here at TabletopTV, we still love Jeremy.
So the final question I have prepared is when you're building your one-shot, do you craft it around your potential players' skills and levels and feats, or do you build your one-shot and tell your players what level their characters will be?
Because like what I'm using a one-shot for is a specific reason. It's either filler content or like a break, or it is like brand new players. I'm more deriving that. I'm saying, hey, we're doing this thing in this other part of the world. You're all level 5. Roll some characters and let's go. Mm-hmm. Or you're brand new players. You're starting level 1, and we're doing it from the very beginning. So yeah, I think that's huge to keep your players in mind, and don't let them run the show. Don't let them railroad you. You railroad them.
Uh-oh. Hypocrisy on the podcast.
You're right. It's really weird when someone else says it.
Yeah. It's a bad word, Kyle.
I know it is, but it's kind of like saying Voldemort and being the only person who doesn't realize it's a cuss word.
There's Kyle comparing himself to Harry Potter.
That was everyone in elementary school. I didn't like that nickname. I did not like being the Harry Potter kid.
I'm just the chosen one here at Tabletop Talk.
And I had said I had main character syndrome.
That's fair.
Oh my gosh.
So about that question, Jeremy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so for player skills and experience, it is 100% taken in, and it affects how lenient and patient I am. When I've now run a one-shot for one of my nephews who's now 19, Caden. What's up, Caden?
Is he 19 already?
He is 19 already. So anyway.
19 last year.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Thanks, Anthony.
I mean,
Math
because
is
my
tough.
cousin Lily, she's graduating this year. I don't know how that happened.
I know. So anyway, with Caden, first one shot, it was like, okay, a little bit of patience. And then I was just progressing. You're like, okay, no, you can't do that, right? And I think at the start with players who are very new, I know a lot of people understand the term like yes and for improv, where you're just going with it. It's like, oh, yeah, you accept that and you add to it, right? And I think at the start, you want to also do, for me personally, you want to also do yes and, but you also want to do no but. Because for an experienced player, I could just tell them, no, you can't do that, right? And I'll be like, sorry, not in this world, right? Or that's the way I'm ruling it is this, and we're just going to move forward with that, right? But with a new player, a lot of times you just, for me, I'm like, yes, and, but also when they're like, can I do this? And you're like, no, but you could try this, right? Where it's very accepting and you're trying to help like lift them up to be players.
That's now two really fundamentally sales tactics coming from Jeremy on this podcast episode. Yeah. The invitation to return and the yes or the no but or the yes and. It's almost as if you worked in sales.
Oh, gosh.
But they are the key things to being a DM. I mean, and I think being a good player is understanding those rules and accepting them and not arguing at the table about it.
And I love it, too, because it's not just shutting people down, which sometimes you have to do as the DM. You're not an improv troupe. You have to manage the whole table. And sometimes saying yes to this person is going to ruin the night for that person. And so you have to balance that. But by saying no, but you still leave that door open for that person you are saying no to. I love that.
For sure. As for me, when it comes to my players, I think if I'm doing it for new people, then I actively write a one-shot that's designed for new people. If I'm doing it for people who've been playing for a long time, then I think I tend to, like with this one I'm working on right now, I tend to focus more on the lore and focus on the story itself, because I know with experienced players, they'll be able to find a way to work around it and find a way to enjoy it themselves. With new players, I keep it very simple. I mean, Jeremy watched my one shot that I did where it was a very basic, hey, you guys are all hired to go steal from the dragon cult. Oh, your employer turned out to be a red dragon. Who knew? I mean, it's a very standard thing, but I made the 3-act system in there knowing that several of the people in there had never played D&D before. So I was like, we'll have a first thing that's a little bit of get to know each other. We get a little bit of a role-playing, run into some people on the road that they get a chance to interact with, do some combat, focus on the main mission, call it a day. But most of the time, I honestly don't put my players too much into thought when I'm coming up with the ideas. I like to come up with my ideas and then work around the players on how can I fix this idea so I could still use it, or what do I need to change now on it. So it'll be usually a last minute revision like the night before. I will let what players build and what they do matter a little more in there, aside from class. If you tell me your class ahead of time, I will incorporate stuff that is class specific. But for my main thoughts, no. I usually I keep to myself on it and then like word vomit it out to Anthony and Jeremy later. And then Jeremy's like, are you sure you should tell me this? I don't feel like I can play the game if I know everything. And I'm like, well, Jeremy, I need somebody to keep these guys in check, and you're my secret lasso.
Don't tell them that.
Can I add one more thing that I don't think we covered? Is that
No, but we. Okay, yes.
I'm feeling railroaded. No, I was going to say is like, the three of us that have DM'd, we're all very creative and imaginative. And so we like to homebrew everything as much as we can. We like to world build our own stuff. But if you're a new DM, there is so many resources out there for just one shots that you can just use and do, and you don't have to think about it all. And you can just get used to the mechanics of being a DM and managing a table without having to like spend hours and hours crafting the whole thing.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
And your players probably won't even notice.
They're going to have a good time either way.
Yeah.
I mean, as long as you're enjoying it, they're going to have a good time. I do think, though, that's all the time we have for today, you guys. Say it was pretty productive.
I'd say so.
For everyone out there, we love you guys. Tabletop Talk, out.
Five-star rating, if you please, and write that Anthony is the best guest.
Thank you.